Picture this. You're standing in the scorching heat of the Holy Land, your chainmail weighing down every step, sweat pouring beneath a heavy helmet that hasn't been removed in days. The romantic tales of noble knights on holy quests suddenly feel very different when you're living the reality. Welcome to the true story of how medieval crusaders actually survived their journeys to reclaim the Holy Land. For centuries, Hollywood and popular culture have painted crusaders as gleaming knights riding pristine horses across picturesque landscapes. But the reality was far grittier, more desperate, and infinitely more human than any movie could capture. These weren't superhuman warriors blessed by divine protection. They were ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances, forced to adapt or die in foreign lands, thousands of miles from home. The journey itself began long before any crusader set foot in Jerusalem. When Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, he unleashed a movement that would reshape medieval Europe. But what drove ordinary farmers, merchants, and minor nobles to abandon everything they knew? The answer lies in understanding the medieval mindset that viewed earthly suffering as a pathway to eternal salvation. Most crusaders weren't wealthy knights with vast resources. The majority were common folk who sold their possessions, mortgaged their land, or borrowed heavily just to afford basic equipment. A simple sword cost the equivalent of several months' wages for a peasant. Chainmail armor, if they could afford it at all, might represent a family's entire savings. Many crusaders began their journey already in debt, hoping that success in the Holy Land would somehow solve their financial troubles. The logistics of moving tens of thousands of people across Europe presented challenges that would strain even modern military planners. There were no supply lines, no established routes, and certainly no hotels along the way. Crusaders had to carry everything they needed or hope to find it through trading, begging, or taking it by force. Food spoiled quickly in the heat. Water sources were often contaminated or controlled by hostile forces. Disease spread rapidly through crowded camps where basic sanitation was non-existent. Living conditions during the Crusades made medieval peasant life look luxurious by comparison. Crusaders slept on bare ground, often in the open air regardless of weather. Their diet consisted mainly of whatever they could scavenge, supplemented by increasingly stale bread and salted meat when available. Fresh vegetables were rare luxuries. Many crusaders suffered from malnutrition, scurvy, and digestive ailments that weakened them long before they faced any enemy in battle. The social dynamics within crusader armies created additional complications. Nobles commanded peasants who had never taken orders from anyone but their local lord. Language barriers separated different ethnic groups traveling together. Religious fervor could quickly turn to desperation when faced with starvation or disease. Leadership disputes erupted regularly, sometimes splitting entire armies and leaving smaller groups vulnerable to attack. Personal hygiene became a constant struggle that affected both health and morale. Bathing was nearly impossible during long marches. Clothing rotted from sweat and dirt. Lice and other parasites spread unchecked through camps. The romantic image of spotless crusader tunics marked with bright red crosses bore no resemblance to the reality of filthy, torn garments that marked veteran campaigners, igners. The psychological toll of crusading life proved just as devastating as the physical hardships. Imagine leaving behind everything familiar, your village, your family, your entire way of life, for what might be a journey of several years with no guarantee of return. Many crusaders never saw their homeland again, not because they died in battle, but because they succumbed to disease, starvation, or simply the overwhelming stress of constant survival. Religious devotion, while genuine for many, couldn't shield crusaders from the harsh realities of human nature under extreme pressure. Theft became commonplace within crusader camps as desperate men stole food, weapons, or anything valuable from their fellow Christians. Violence erupted over the smallest disputes, a portion of bread, access to water, or sleeping space near a fire. The very people who had sworn to serve God together found themselves fighting each other for basic necessities. The economic reality of crusading created a vicious cycle of desperation. Those who had mortgaged their lands to fund the journey faced financial ruin if they returned empty-handed. This pressure drove many crusaders to increasingly desperate acts, including the massacre of Jewish communities along their route and the brutal sacking of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. What began as religious devotion transformed into a scramble for survival and profit. Medical knowledge of the time made even minor injuries potentially fatal. A small cut could become infected without proper treatment. Broken bones healed poorly, if at all. Battlefield surgeons, when available, worked without anesthesia or understanding of infection. Many crusaders learned crude field medicine out of necessity, using techniques passed down through desperate experience rather than formal training. The lucky ones died quickly in battle, rather than suffering prolonged agony from infected wounds. Communication with home remained nearly impossible for years at a time. Families had no way of knowing whether their loved ones lived or died until survivors eventually returned. This isolation intensified the psychological burden on crusaders, who had no way to share their experiences or seek comfort.
Get that cart moving now! We can't, the axle is split! We are finished!
It might take months or years to reach their destination. The climate of the Middle East presented challenges that European bodies simply weren't prepared to handle. Scorching desert heat during the day gave way to surprisingly cold nights. Sudden sandstorms could blind and disorient entire armies. Water sources that appeared clean often carried diseases unknown in Europe. Many crusaders never adapted to the dramatic temperature changes and suffered from heat exhaustion, dehydration, and exposure-related illnesses throughout their campaigns. Despite these overwhelming hardships, some crusaders managed to establish themselves permanently in the Holy Land, creating the Crusader states that would endure for nearly 2 centuries. These settlers faced the ongoing challenge of maintaining European customs and governance in a completely foreign environment, surrounded by populations who viewed them as unwelcome invaders. Their daily lives became a constant balancing act between survival, defense, and attempting to recreate the familiar structures of medieval European society in an utterly alien landscape. The next time you see a movie depicting crusaders as shining paragons of medieval chivalry, remember the reality behind the legend. These weren't mythical heroes living in a fantasy world of honor and glory. They were real people facing impossible odds, driven by faith, desperation, and the simple human need to survive another day in conditions that would challenge even the most hardened modern soldier. The true story of how crusaders lived reveals something far more profound than any romanticized tale ever could. It shows us the incredible resilience of ordinary people pushed beyond their limits, the way religious conviction could both sustain and corrupt, and how the pursuit of salvation could lead to both remarkable acts of devotion and unspeakable brutality. These men weren't saints or demons, but something far more complex and human. Understanding the daily reality of Crusader life strips away centuries of myth and propaganda to reveal a truth that's simultaneously more disturbing and more inspiring than the legends. It reminds us that history's great movements were carried out not by perfect heroes, but by flawed human beings struggling with the same fundamental challenges of survival, purpose, and meaning that we face today. The Crusades may have ended 800 years ago, but the human story they tell remains as relevant as ever.